Hello, good morning. Welcome to Gaming Insight Daily for Friday, February 21st, 2025. I'm Steve Saylor. This is your daily show of gaming news, accessibility news, or updates about my life. I have iced coffee in my PlayStation mug today. Yeah. Why don't you enjoy a little morning beverage with me? So this episode's actually coming out a little bit late because I stayed up a little bit late last night. I was watching the Canada-US hockey game, the Four Nations Championship game last night, and it ended around midnight, so I decided to sleep in a little bit today. And congrats to our Canadian boys for winning 3-2 in overtime. Yes. Also, kind of a fun little video game thing. Xbox Canada ran a simulation, as you know, sometimes the companies or outlets want to do, especially around a big sort of championship game. I've seen people try to be able to predict who's going to win the Super Bowl based off of a simulated version of the Super Bowl in Madden each and every year. But this time, there actually was one for NHL. Actually, let me see if I can be able to bring it up because they ran Xbox Canada ran one, ran sort of a simulation in, I believe it would have been NHL 2025. Yeah, so here we go. I'll bring it up here on here. So this was tweeted out yesterday at 5:33 p.m. Eastern. So this is 3 hours before the game even started. And they basically say, or this is by EA Sports, Canada wins Four Nations face-off title in EA Sports NHL simulation. McDavid scores winner in overtime to defeat United States in Thriller. This is simulated in NHL 25. Not only was this prediction correct in the fact that Canada won, but this is so accurate because it was McDavid who scored the game-winning goal, and it was in overtime in a pretty much thriller game because it was pretty close the entire time. No team had a larger than a 1-point lead. So, congrats Xbox Canada. Like, do we have like a little bit of like a Nostradamus situation here? Because seriously, they should start predicting stuff more often. Anyway, I hope you have, congrats again to Canada. Woo! I feel like we needed this one. We needed that win. I don't know, and what I love too is that, okay, so yes, of course, yeah, with the Canadians will boo the national anthem, or the U.S. national anthem, that's fine. But they all sang like really loudly for the Canadian national anthem. But what I loved in the crowd was that there was a constant chant of USA because they were playing in Boston, so they were like, obviously there was a lot of American fans there at the game as well, and they were chanting USA, USA. But what I love, and this is the creativity of Canadians, what I love so much was, and this is not, no offense to anybody who was American, but I think you all kind of understand why we kind of thought I thought it was clever, was that basically Canada was saying boo SA. Basically pulling of Homer, like Simpsons boo earns. They were saying boo SA. And there were several times where the U.S. crowd would try to chant USA, and you could hear the Canadian crowd even louder, basically saying boo SA. And it was just hilarious. I think that was, it was just funny to watch. But it was a nail-biter of a game. It was definitely a nail-biter of a game. Canada got to the early lead, then the U.S. caught up with 2 goals, gaining their lead, 1-point lead, and then they tied it up, and then it basically stayed tied throughout the rest of the game until the overtime. And then it was sudden death. Basically, whoever scored first wins the whole thing, and Connor McDavid basically won the whole dang thing. So congrats. Did I say his name? Was it Connor McDavid? I just realized that now. I don't know. Anyway, McDavid won game-winning goal, overtime. Congrats to Xbox Canada, I guess, as well. All right, let's jump into today's news for the day. This is actually kind of interesting. So I do have actually, like you probably noticed in the title of this episode that I am that you saw I'm going to be talking about this. So I have some thoughts. Among Us 3D is a new game that brings together PC and VR players. Free demo out soon. This is by Eddie McCooch over at GameSpot. Innersloth has made a series of Among Us announcements, including a brand new game, Among Us 3D. A demo for the game, which shifts the perspective to a first-person view, will be available during Steam Next Fest, beginning on February 24th. So that's this coming Monday. Among Us 3D for Steam allows players to join cross-platform lobbies with people playing Among Us in VR on MetaQuest, Steam VR, PlayStation VR 2, and Pico. I don't actually know Pico. Can we use Pico? Fans can expect the same intense, fast-paced gameplay, complete with voice chat, new customization options, game modes, rules, and all the deception-filled fun without the need for a VR headset. Innersloth said in its announcement. Check out the trailer below to get a first look at Among Us 3D. So let's take a look at it real quick. Whoop, we don't have the audio. Here we go. Become the bean. Oh, that dang card swipe.
I saw him. You saw him?
On PC, Steam, Among Us 3D. Wishlist now. And that dang card swipe. There we go. Among Us 3D is not compatible with the original Among Us. Players in that game will not be able to interact with those in Among Us 3D. Innersloth also announced that Among Us VR is changing names in the coming months and will be renamed Among Us 3D. Among Us 3D. Yeah. The studio also announced that it's launching a new in-game currency called Stardust. Players can spend this on customization options, and this seemingly builds on the game's previous cosmetic microtransactions. Among Us 3D is available to wishlist on Steam now, and the demo will be available, like I said, February 24th to March 3rd as part of Steam Next Fest. Sorry, I had to cough there. So I wanted to talk about this because Among Us is kind of one of those games where there's a lot of design elements to the original game that do make the game accessible. Now, this is kind of the main topic I wanted to talk about today. Could Among Us 3D be more or less accessible than regular Among Us? So let's talk about sort of the accessibility within regular Among Us, and we'll even bring up sort of the clip that they have here in the trailer just as an example. Sorry, I tried to be able to put it to just full screen within the browser itself, but I couldn't be able to do that. Excuse me. Sorry. So when you're on a 2D plane, there are a lot of accessibility accommodations that are already built into the design, both for motor and for blind players. In that there is no camera controls. You're pretty much the only way to be able to know what's happening in the world is literally just through movement. And also in regards to just through movement, it means that you are only limited to the arrow keys, or basically your WASD keys. So already for that accommodation, you already are accessible for a lot of motor disabled players and a lot of blind players, because there's no camera to contend with. You're not having to try to be able to see anything on screen specifically, because as your character moves, the camera moves with you. And that honestly is a really great accessible way to play, because it definitely eliminates, again, extra buttons or extra sort of having to be able to use your hand for different movements, whether it's using a thumbstick or what have you. You can still use a thumbstick, but you can basically still be able to move around with, like, say, the D-pad or, again, WASD or arrow keys on your keyboard. And again, because you don't need to use a camera, you don't have to use your right thumbstick to do anything other than to be able to use your mouse if you're on keyboard to be able to do any of the controls, or use your thumb for the face buttons, which is how you interact with the world. So already, again, for motor disabled players, super simple to be able to pick up and play. And also, if you think about it, if you're also on the mobile side, also makes it a little bit easier to be able to play, because you're only limited to a certain amount of controls. Mobile's not necessarily the best way to be able to play it for disabled players, but it is an option. And with regards to blind players, again, because you're only limited to, you don't have to worry about camera, you could basically use a lot of basically by when your character moves with the camera. Now we're starting getting into, okay, audio, basically audio like cues. And as you move throughout the map, there are distinct audio cues for certain sections of the map. Not all, because there definitely are areas that are pretty much, it's just all you hear is just the ship room tone. But when you have something like, say, proximity chat turned on, which is something that became a little bit more of a regular feature within Among Us players, then you start to kind of at least be able to figure out of how to be able to like basically who chatted, who's around in specific areas, and that helps blind players. Unfortunately, it does not help for deaf or hard of hearing players, because there is no built-in sort of like captioning for proximity chat. There is a chat feature built into the game, so there is that option. Especially when you're going into the voting stage, you definitely need to be able to use the chat for deaf and hard of hearing players in order to be able to at least let your thoughts and your be known. And it is something that is built into the game, so that if also as well, it allows you to you're not having to basically be on voice chat if you don't want to, and you can just go into the chat. Now, sometimes basically I've seen players where they prefer that only ghosts will go into chat, so they're like, you have to kind of get rid of that sort of house rule, as it were. But the chat is there designed for deaf and hard of hearing players. If proximity chat is turned on, unfortunately there's no captions or subtitles, but that's not necessarily Among Us. In a way, that's been basically modded in, unless it has been updated or added in since I last played the regular Among Us game. So I apologize if that's been added in since then. Now, in regards to the tasks themselves, they are relatively simple for motor disabled players. Not all the time, because obviously with the joke of having to be able to use the card swipe can be also difficult for and challenging for motor disabled players. Are they Are the little mini games accessible to say blind players? Not really. Unfortunately, there are a lot of things you have to rely on visuals in order to be able to know what's going on. Have they gotten better for accessibility over time? Yes and no. There was one of my favorite sort of accessibility stories about it is one of the games in the game is wires, where basically you have to link the right color wire to the right sort of socket. Obviously, for colorblind players, that's difficult. So what they did was they added little symbols on the wires and on the sockets, so that way players who are colorblind who have trouble trying to see specific colors, they can at least be able to know where to be able to put the wires. So they have so Innersloth has been like adding little bits of here and there for accessibility overall. The interface is also very large, especially so for the low vision players. It's really great. I've been able to sort of play it on my big screen, like 50-inch TV here, and I've never had any problems with any text on the screen. Sometimes, you know, definitely there's text that's a little bit small, but essentially you are kind of for I'd say like 95% of the time the text is in a decent size, even within game. So that's kind of like a quick overview of the current accessibility within just sort of base Among Us. When you start adding in like different roles and obviously like and who like figure like if you're an imposter and you're basically disabled, could you still be able to play as an imposter? I think you can to a certain degree, but for blind players probably not. Because there's not a lot of audio cues to let you know when there's anybody nearby. So blind players are kind of still, again, unfortunately, in a lot of games nowadays, and I still hate it, is that they're the ones that kind of like the outliers that unfortunately are not able to fully play. Now, when you jump into the potential for the 3D aspect, which has been around for obviously since Among Us VR kind of got started. So now we're going to see this basically breaking away from VR and just being a 3D mode of the game. There is some concerns with that, because like going back to the beginning when I talked about the aspect of basically the not having to be able to move around with a camera. Now when you're introducing a 3D element, now you're having to be able to add in a camera control. You have to use a mouse or a thumbstick in addition to the movement keys in order to be able to or movement buttons in order to be able to play. Which in essence kind of makes it a little bit inaccessible. We don't know what the settings are. Actually, I should probably look up to see if there's any accessibility settings in Among Us VR. I'm just looking up for, I don't think anyone's ever really covered it. I'm just going to take a look at the options. Someone had posted a video of the options menu.
Let's cover movement helpers in Among Us VR. Settings like blinder strength can help you be more comfortable moving in VR.
Okay, let's bring this up here on this window here. Here we go.
Let's cover movement helpers in Among Us VR. Settings
This is
like
more
blinder
specific for
strength can
VR,
help
so
you be
there
more
could be
comfortable
stuff that you can take a
moving
look
in
at.
VR. Try moving around with different strengths. If head-based movement is on, when moving forward, you'll turn when you turn your head. Go ahead and try it out.
That's actually a very good sort of for accessibility. If you can be able to move your head, it actually does make it a little bit easier to kind of move, so you're not having to be able to like use your thumbstick, but only if you are able to move your head, which can be difficult. Okay, and that's all we got. Let's take a look at, let's see if there's any other let's see.
We'll start off with a quick disclaimer. I've been playing this on the MetaQuest 2 for
So now you got to think with regards to accessibility within VR, there are a lot more different combinations that have to be made.
Desktop app for PC VR, so I can only go off of what is really said on the Steam store page as far as Steam VR support and yes.
Let's see if we can get to the actual options.
Play where you just only use one controller, be it the left or the right, which is really cool.
So, okay, so that's interesting. So you can only use one controller in the VR aspect. So they probably will be able to port that relatively okay to the PC version, I would imagine.
You only have smooth movement, which only but turn speed PC or maybe even PSVR 2, but I'm not sure for standalone.
So I'm trying to see if they have any of the if he shows any of the options menu.
So please do keep that in mind.
So okay, so it looks like they basically like at least the accessibility has been posted about Among Us VR is mostly from a VR standpoint, which is fine because obviously there's a lot more accessibility accommodations that need to be made when you're talking about Among Us in VR. When it comes to PC, however, you don't have the option of being able to move your head in order to be able to turn or turn the camera. You have to basically use a camera control, which could potentially in these settings, not say that this may not have it, but potentially in the settings, you could have it so that when you turn, it automatically, like basically the camera automatically turns wherever you are facing. So basically kind of like automatically sort of centers it. So you could do that to eliminate the need for an additional camera button. But for the most part, what I'm going to guess is that they're not going to be able to do it because if it's just a 3D version of the game, it's more simpler to be able to design basically based on a two thumbstick or two movement sort of type controls, whether it's a left stick for movement, right stick for camera, or WASD for movement on keyboard and mouse for camera, which actually does help for motor disabled players. But so keyboard and mouse mostly does, but essentially you're kind of eliminating some of the accessibility from the base game into this. Granted though, when it comes to blind players, you would think, okay, well, this might be difficult for blind players. This actually could potentially be a little bit better for navigational assistance if there is any decent audio cues. Because you're in a 3D environment, there are certain audio that can be able to play depending on where you are. And because they did show in the trailer that there is proximity chat, means that already built into the game, there is you can be able to hear where other players are, and there is that directional sound depending on where they are located. So there is ways to be able to sort of navigate. It's not the best, but built into the design without knowing any of the options, having directional sound for certain tasks and for where players are can benefit blind players. Again, not going to be best for blind players. We won't know until we download the game or try the game on starting on Monday. But there is could potentially be some accessibility there if that was accommodated for. Definitely hard of hearing. Obviously, with the proximity chat, we already talked about that. That could also be a negative for Among Us 3D because there may not be any automatic captions or text to speech, or sorry, speech to text, because that we need. The deaf and hard of hearing players will need that if there is going to be proximity chat in the game directly itself without necessarily going into the meetings in order to be able to vote people off. So we'll have to there's already we're kind of seeing some accessibility concerns within Among Us 3D more than we're just a regular Among Us. Among Us kind of had a more like obviously a very basic sort of core gameplay and design that in and of itself was inherently accessible, not necessarily intentionally accessible. But with Among Us 3D, there's now a lot more accessibility accommodations that would need to be made, whether in settings or in core design, that I don't think potentially could be in here. Yeah, I think as well. Like, so you may think, okay, great. So basically, Interslot does not care about disabled players. No, that's definitely not the case. I would say that there as much as I don't like saying that like there are limitations to indie developers, I think that indie developers can be able to with the resources and time that they have a lot more flexibility when it comes to trying out accessibility or adding in accessibility into their games. But in regards to Interslot's case, it just depends. You gotta remember, there is a very small team that works at Interslot. This is not like a big sort of AAA studio now, even with the success of Among Us. It is still a very small team that works on Among Us. So the limitation for them to be able to include accessibility is we need to think about time, resources, and people power. The issue with adding accessibility is people power. There's just not enough people on the team to accommodate for accessibility. I'd love to be able to talk to Interslot about that. Actually, I may even reach out to see if they, can we chat about that? But essentially, that's, I don't think it's intentional that they're excluding disabled players because of this. I think it's just the resource that is essentially the hardest for them to be able to get past is the people power. Now, who knows how long they've been working on this version. Obviously, they may not be as much because they already did a lot more of the design built into the VR version. So essentially, if this is just direct port to make it more playable on just PCs without VR, there's not that much sort of accommodation or a lot much that has to be done in order to be able to basically to make it work on just PCs without a VR headset. So I would say that yes, on the surface, there is a lot more accessibility concerns with Among Us 3D versus regular Among Us. Does that mean that Among Us 3D is going to be more inaccessible than a regular Among Us? We have to wait and see. So I would encourage you as of Monday, if on Steam, so it'll be a free demo. You can download it, try it for yourself. I'll definitely try it out. Maybe see if I can be able to get some folks to be able to play it with me to try it out. And then I might do potentially an accessibility review of that because it's been a while. I've done a quick accessibility review of Among Us when I did my Going In Blind series. Actually, I'll leave that link in the description down below because I actually thought that was one of my favorite episodes I did. But I will say that to answer the question, I think that I believe that will be the title of this video is Among Us 3D more or less accessible than regular Among Us? I would say potentially less accessible, but we have to wait and see. So again, we have to think of the greater context. It's not intentional. I think it's just we just have to sort of as disabled players, we have the ability to be able to give constructive feedback to Interslot to potentially try to be able to make this game more accessible, because it is a social game, and social games are very vital to disabled players as a whole. We need that. We need that desperately. We need to be able to have especially as games has become is the social hangout for kids today. Instead of necessarily just going outside and playing with friends, a lot of them are basically playing Fortnite and Roblox or Among Us with their friends, and that is the new social hangout outside of school. So as disabled kids who want to play these games, we need to be able to make these accessible for them as well. Like we can't, so we make it accessible for us, but we need to make it accessible for them as well, because this is the social hangouts. And if a disabled player can't play these games, a disabled kid can't play these games, then they're missing out on that social interaction. So we definitely need that. All right, you know what? Actually, I'm going to end it here. Again, I didn't mean to sort of have like 2 days in a row where I'm basically just focusing on one story, because I did have one that I wanted to talk about, because it was like after failing to meet expectations at launch, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth shoots to number 3 in the US charts with Steam debut. It's more of like hey, that's great for Steam, yay! The PC releases help a lot, but that's all I got for it. But I'll just leave it there. Anyway. Thank you so much for watching and or listening. I again do apologize. It's now 10:20 by the time I finished recording this, and normally this is up at 10 o'clock, so I do apologize. It is late. But thank you so much for listening and or watching. I hope you have a great and wonderful day, and also because it's Friday, a great and wonderful weekend. Once again, as a reminder, Monday I will be live streaming on this YouTube channel for the Blind Gamer 10th anniversary special, or the 10th anniversary stream. It'll be live on Twitch and also on YouTube. And and also we've got some merch, stevesaylor.store. You might see it actually pop up in somewhere in the YouTube page on the page of this YouTube video, and go check it out. Check out some of the merch and see if there's anything that you want to be able to get. So all right, take care, have yourself a great day and a great weekend, and I will see you all on Monday for the 10th anniversary. Take care. Bye-bye.